Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I will be presenting some of the research I did in 2020 and 2021 with teachers in secondary schools in Quebec and Ontario who work with their students to reclaim a vision of financial literacy education that is oriented towards justice. And I will be highlighting some of the specific pedagogical strategies that teachers use to achieve this vision. And so, if you're interested in more of the theoretical underpinnings of this research or some of the methods that I used, then I would encourage you to read the article in Theory and Research in Social Education, and that is linked below. Thanks so much.
My name is Agata Soroko. I'm a postdoctoral scholar in the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Riverside. My article, however, draws on my doctoral research at the University of Ottawa, which was funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So I'll begin with some context. First, let's take a look at what financial literacy is. The OECD defines it as a combination of awareness, knowledge, skill, attitude, and behavior necessary to make sound financial decisions and ultimately achieve individual financial well being. And in the aftermath of the global financial crisis of 2008, governments, politicians, and policymakers alike blamed the financial collapse on the irresponsible financial behavior of ordinary people rather than, say, banks or governments or the nature of the capitalist system in which we live. And then they used this reasoning to justify a push for more financial literacy education in schools. And critical scholars have long challenged this tendency to tie personal finances to deep seated social and economic problems. But for this study, I was really interested in what teachers thought about it. For some context around why I took up this research, I'll go back to September 2017 when the Quebec Education Minister announced the rollout of a new mandatory financial education course and was met with resistance. Teachers' unions were concerned that the material doesn't encourage enough critical thinking about capitalism and the global financial industry. The president of the Quebec Provincial Association of Teachers even stated that the introduction of a class like this is not in line with our philosophy of education, and that it was coming from the financial groups, bankers, and whatnot, whereas teachers have more of a liberal view. You're supposed to acquire knowledge that would open up your horizons and help you from a critical standpoint. Now, while these statements came from union leaders, they were meant to represent the perspectives of teachers in the province. And one such teacher was Vincent, one of the participants in the study. So here he sums up nicely the problem with the financial education course that had been introduced in Quebec and with financial literacy education generally. Of course, this is also where the title of the article originates. According to Vincent, there's nothing about this program that is really providing students the critical thinking skills that they need to go forward. It's this very individualistic perspective on financial education, which really seems aimed at helping young people survive austerity, as opposed to helping young people prosper and maybe be part of building a prosperous society. And Vincent is exactly the kind of teacher I was interested in for my research. I wanted to talk to educators who challenged traditional conceptions of financial literacy education as merely teaching students how to budget, save, and invest. These were two of my research questions that I report on in this particular article. And a very quick word about my methods. So I sought to answer these research questions through a case study of 10 outlier teachers. That's to say, teachers who understand and teach financial literacy in a way that's different from the norm, even subversive. Because teachers' understandings of criticality and what it means to teach differently varied, in this article, I focus explicitly on the 7 teachers who I identified as actively rejecting traditional financial literacy paradigms in favor of a critical economic literacy. And I collected data using multiple instruments, but again, here I only report on data from 2 rounds of in depth interviews and 1 round of deliberative inquiry focus groups. And now I'll turn to the findings. So here's what I mean when I say that participants rejected traditional notions of financial literacy and worked towards a critical economic literacy. For Andrew, this kind of literacy entails having an understanding of the historical roots of the economic system that we have now, a critical understanding of the way in which an economic structure structures the society, and a literacy, a micro and macroeconomic literacy that enables students to make powerful arguments for the kind of world they want to live in with the understanding of the current economic structure and vernacular. Based on this research, I developed a critical economic literacy framework which outlines the distinct set of knowledge, skills, and pedagogical strategies that teachers use. Next, I'll provide 1 or 2 examples from each category. And I'll start with critical economic literacy knowledge. So, one type of knowledge that teachers advocate for is that of alternative economic arrangements. For teachers, merely identifying problems with the economic status quo is not enough. Students must also grapple with solutions and contemplate alternative models to structuring the economy. For Maria, for example, this kind of teaching begins with exposing students to the idea that the economy is a construction, that it was created by people. Maria explains, sometimes we talk about it as if it was some kind of natural phenomenon, but it's not. We've created the whole of it. And there are other ways of exchanging goods, and it's worked. And some people work and live in communities where they do mostly exchanging. I live in a small town, and we do a lot of exchanging with our farmer friends. It's important to show that there are alternatives, which is something that we never talk about. And in terms of building the skills for critical economic literacy, one of these skills is challenging dominant narratives and examining taken for granted assumptions about how the world works. So here's Eric describing what that might look like. We tend to get pushed, we got here with a free market. And those who got wealthy because they had such great ideas and were so much smarter and so much more efficient and better at doing things than everyone else. Even people like Bezos, who is supposedly the richest man. But Amazon was built on an infrastructure built by the public. Products are shipped all over the world using that infrastructure, which runs a huge environmental debt that everyone shares. It's important to consider the externalities and the public influence that has helped those who are perceived as successful now get to where they are. So, interrogating stories about billionaire success, according to Eric, teaches students to challenge dominant ideas about the free market and meritocracy. Students then have the opportunity to reflect on whether it's possible for individuals to be entirely personally responsible, self sufficient, or self made. Students also examine the costs incurred by the public at large as a result of private wealth attainment. This is also a really good example of how teachers in my study connect financial literacy education to issues of climate justice, which is also a really novel and significant insight of this research. Important to note is that these teachers don't reject the traditional personal finance paradigm entirely. They, of course, know that some of these skills are useful. For example, Andrew acknowledged that in his class, students learn about personal finance topics such as supply and demand curves, compound interest, and how to invest in stock markets. But the idea behind this teaching is to also equip students with the language that they need to understand this dominant discourse so that they can negotiate it and resist it and engage with it. Here he explains this further. We explore the major economic theories and trade logic and develop a sense of the discipline. But at the same time, as we look at that structural aspect, that history and the power relations of the way things work now, we also look at how economics is really about how we live and how we produce the goods and services that we need and want. And it doesn't have to be the domain of the experts, who often are working against the common interest. And here are two examples of the pedagogical strategies teachers use in this kind of teaching. Posing big questions. Miles pointed out in one of his interviews that traditional financial literacy education programs tend to be wildly unsuccessful, in that they not only fail to improve people's financial security, as research has shown, but they also tend to impart knowledge that seems largely irrelevant and unhelpful in the moment. In his experience, children and youth are generally not interested in the details of mortgages, life insurance, or credit cards because all of that changes over time that form the core curriculum of most personal finance programs. But instead, Miles found that students tend to be more interested in the big questions. So here's what he means by the big questions. How should we distribute the resources in our society? Why is it that this group has a lot of resources and this group has a little bit of resources? These kinds of questions. Why do we have unions? Why do we have minimum wage? What are taxes? Why is the government taking money from me and then giving it to other people? So, just to wrap up, as you can see, this kind of critical economic literacy education, in contrast to more traditional or conventional versions, would instead convey to students that we have choices about the economic system we promote. As Miles puts it, the world does not have to be like this. It was created like this, and it could be otherwise. And for Oliver, people and numbers can change things, which means teaching students that we have the power and capability to advance fairness and justice over inequity and greed. Scarcely any studies have investigated in depth how teachers understand and conceptualize financial literacy education, or how they translate their sense making into practice. So, this is really the first in depth study to do that. Another major contribution of my work is that it provides a set of workable tools and ideas about how teachers can reclaim a vision of financial literacy education that is oriented toward economic justice. In showing what this kind of teaching looks like, as reported by the participants, it really makes concrete the various theoretical frameworks in the literature that advocate and call for transformative and critical visions, but that are regularly detached from praxis. And of course, the framework proposed in the study is not exhaustive of the possibilities for critical economic literacy teaching and learning, and it's limited to a specific time and place with a small group of teachers. It does, though, complicate the meaning of financial literacy, and it suggests that the mainstream approach to financial literacy education is underimagined and insufficient for the current political moment. Again, if you're interested in some of the theory and literature or the details regarding the methods, or just to see the framework in full, please see my article linked below. And please reach out to me by email with questions or if you would just like to connect. Thank you.